Thanks so much for joining our call today, everyone. This is Amanda with Public Citizen, and we want to give you an important update as well as hear from you today about important democracy protections that are needed. We had the markup of H.R. 1 yesterday, and Lisa Gilbert is going to talk to us about that today, and also our president, Robert Weissman. They're eager to talk to you, and while we're waiting for a few other callers to join, please press *3 if you have any questions about anything that Public Citizen is working on, really, but just press that *3 button. We are calling over 70,000 members and supporters to join the conversation today, and we're really looking forward to spending the next hour with you. So please just stay on the line for another couple minutes while we wait for more donors to join the call. Again, you can press *3 if you have a question. We'll be hearing from Robert Weissman, Public Citizen's president, here shortly, and then our executive vice president, Lisa Gilbert. We're working really hard right now. It's a beautiful day in Washington and lots to do, and so we're anxious to update you. Robert Weissman will be speaking first. We've got a few thousand people on the call right now, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to him to get us started. I've worked with Rob for over 11 years now, and he is just a fabulous leader, and it's an honor to work with him. Rob?
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks everyone for joining the call. What we wanted to do today is to talk to you about the state of our democracy, the fate of our democracy, and what we can do to make sure that fate is a positive one. I'm going to talk a little bit about some context about what's going on and the kinds of work that Public Citizen has been doing to strengthen our democracy and to hold off forces of reaction and racism. And then I'm going to bounce it over to my colleague, Lisa Gilbert, our executive vice president, who will give an update about what's going on Capitol Hill right now as the Congress is considering key pieces of legislation to defend and strengthen our democracy and to deal with a filibuster, which is itself another obstacle against democracy that we're going to have to overcome or work around. So I'm going to give you this context, and then Lisa will come in and give you the blow-by-blow of what's been happening up on the Hill. Let's get going. Where we are right now, it's no exaggeration to say, is that our country is at a crossroads. And I think a lot of us have had trouble digesting this because it's just been unavoidable to just feel such a sense of relief with Donald Trump out of office. And for a lot of us, it's been a time to sort of pay a little bit less attention to politics and just try to figure out life as we come out of the pandemic. However, congressional Republicans and Republicans in the state legislatures, and sorry to have to describe it in a partisan way, but that is what is in fact going on. Republicans in those bodies are working desperately and shamelessly to really hollow out our democracy. And we're facing scenarios that are truly frightening in terms of where we might be going with voter suppression, with a return to Jim Crow-style denial of the right to vote for people of color, for flirtation with and even embrace of fascism, and creating structural impediments to progressive electoral victories and achievement of the progressive agenda, even though it's overwhelmingly favored by Americans. So that's the dire and troubling scenario that we face. But the good news is that there's a totally different pathway that we can choose to go on, not just to sort of hold that stuff off, but to really deepen and advance our democracy, not just to deal with the urgent threats we face right now, but to confront and address the systemic problems that we've long faced and really deliver on what democracy's promise is, which is rule of the people rather than rule by the few. The way forward with that involves legislation up on the Hill that I hope all of you are familiar with, the For the People Act, which is known as H.R. 1 or S1, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which is H.R. 4, as well as some other important pieces of legislation, some of which Lisa will talk about. So let's just pause for a second. And so I'm throwing around a scary frame that the country is facing this real serious challenge. And I just want to reflect on why I say that and insist that it's not hyperbole, that I'm accurately describing what we're facing. So two really important things have happened that you're going to be familiar with, but not enough people, I think, are really pausing to reflect on what they say. The first is that this morning, the House of Representative Republicans threw Liz Cheney out of her leadership position, not for being insufficiently conservative. She is extremely conservative, but for a single reason, which is that she refused to spread the lie that Donald Trump won the election in November 2020, and she refused to show total fealty to Donald Trump. That's it. So what we're seeing from the party is a willingness to state lies, make policy on lies, choose leadership based on lies, and not incidental lies, not casual lies, not unimportant kind of political hyperbole, but lies that cut to the core of whether our elections are legitimate. And of course, there's an embrace of and a willingness to even justify the January 6th insurrection, even though it was brought by a confederation of conspiracists, racists, and reactionaries. Well, that move against Liz Cheney connects to the other key thing that's happening now across the country, which you're going to be familiar with, which is these now more than 360 proposals in states across the nation to make it harder for people to vote. That's what they are. They're proposals to make it harder for people to vote, and of course not just any people, but primarily people of color, primarily Black and Latinos voters, and solely with the purpose of obstructing people's right to vote. A half dozen of them have already become law, and more are on the way. So that's what we're facing. Not just that, with Republican-dominated legislatures, as redistricting occurs across the states, we're going to see more extreme partisan and racial gerrymandering to further entrench Republicans if the current system is allowed to stay in place. So that's the reality of what we're facing. We have a cure, though, in these bills that I mentioned, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that would wipe away all of these voter suppression bills and advance voting rights. It's hard to imagine that the country is now in a lockdown battle over where we're going to make it harder for people to vote or easier for people to vote, but that is the choice. That is the choice. So we have that available. We have in H.R. 1 a solution for the problem of extreme gerrymandering. And crucially, we have measures to deal with the deep systemic problem of big money dominance of our politics, dominance of elections and policymaking by corporations and the super rich, with a system that would empower small donors and give matching money to candidates who collect lots of small contributions from people and renounce the idea of taking big donations from anyone. So we have this solution, but of course, how do we get there? Well, we have to do the advocacy that's the core of what Public Citizen is and what we all work on together. Now, we've been working on democracy, as you know, from our founding, which goes back now 5 decades. But our current really deep commitment to it goes back 11 years now to the day the Supreme Court decided the Citizens United case, the one that held that corporations have the right to spend money to influence elections, and our call on that day for a constitutional amendment to overturn that decision. Around that, we built a big and powerful movement that has put the issue of money in politics front and center in Washington, D.C. Several years ago, we organized a retreat among many of our allied organizations to say, in the middle of the nightmare of the Trump administration, how can we be ready not just to breathe a sigh of relief that Trump is out when he's finally out, but be ready to catapult forward with true democratic reform? And out of that, we birthed something called the Declaration for American Democracy, which is now hundreds of organizations-wide coalition that is leading the charge to win passage of the bills that I've been talking about. And we've been doing a ton, some of which Lisa will touch on. Just this last Saturday, we organized 150 actions across the country with partners. The John Lewis Day of Action had people from Georgia to California and everywhere in between turning out to demand passage of the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And we did that not just with our traditional core supporters, but with new allies from Black communities across the country, really leveraging our power in ways that are making a difference on Capitol Hill. But we've got more to do to get this thing across the finish line. We have between now and the end of July to win passage. That's the window where this is going to be considered in Congress, and we're going to have to get across the finish line in the Senate. I'm going to turn over to Lisa in just a second to explain what we're doing and how we're going to get there. But I want to give you just one last thing. If you're doubting the central importance of what I'm talking about, I think there's no better proof of my point than these comments from some people you'll be familiar with. Mitch McConnell says about the For the People Act, it is an atrocity. He says, we're going to do everything we can to stop it. Senator Mike Lee from Utah says that the For the People Act is rotten to the core. He said it's as if it were written in hell by the devil himself. And Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, says he has never been more worried about a piece of legislation than he is about the For the People Act. Well, I can't imagine a better set of endorsements of the importance of working on this. Lisa Gilbert, our executive vice president, has been doing just crucial work, both as a super effective and connected lobbyist on Capitol Hill, but also leading our broad coalition, working for those and other pieces of legislation. Let me turn it over to her now. Thank you all for joining us. Remember, we're going to stay on the line after our presentations and take questions, and we just so much appreciate all your support. Lisa, let me kick it over to you.
Before we go to Lisa,
so
I just want to remind folks that you can press *3 to ask any questions. So go ahead and press *3 if you have a question that you want us to get to later. Sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No problem. Thanks, Amanda. And thanks so much, Rob. I'm very appreciative of being here with everyone, getting a chance to describe the hard work we are doing to tackle the problem. As Rob put it, it's just the problem of our time. So I'll start by describing some of the lay of the land on the Hill, as well as with the executive branch on democracy, which, in response to the work of our coalition, the Declaration for American Democracy that Rob described, 200 plus organizations focused on fixing our system, as well as just the clear and present need for reform. The work and the momentum is outrageously active right now. As you know, the For the People Act is currently moving. This groundbreaking legislation addresses the long-term systemic problems caused by corruption, way too much money in politics, and impediments to voting access. And just days before chaos descended on our Capitol, the For the People Act was reintroduced in the new 117th Congress as H.R. 1. That designation really underscores its status as a top legislative priority and demonstrates Speaker Pelosi's deep commitment to making this reform a reality. The sweeping legislative package addresses key areas of reform. It's essential to making our government work more effectively and fairly for all Americans. It will end partisan gerrymandering, create automatic voter registration and same-day registration. It provides sweeping campaign finance reforms to end dark money. It would create a public financing system to empower small donors. It slows the revolving door between public service and private sector, reins in executive branch ethics abuses, and that's just a sampling of this massive overhaul. The bill was co-sponsored by every House Democrat, which is no easy feat, and due in part to a large amount of work and lobbying by our coalition, and passed in the House in March. So from there, the legislation has been on the move in the Senate. And as I know, you all know, thanks to everyone's pressure, the For the People Act was also designated S1 in the Senate. So again, that kind of thing is just a critical signaling of priority level, in this case from Majority Leader Schumer to the rest of the caucus, to the White House, and to the public, but how important he thinks it is to move this bill. The legislation was, introduced officially with nearly all the Democrats on board at the end of March. It had a robust hearing in the Senate Rules Committee chaired by Senator Klobuchar of Minnesota. And from there, as Rob mentioned, just yesterday, we had a committee markup of the bill in which, 100 plus Republican amendments were filed, most of which trying to put Democrats in a tough spot rhetorically and, to pretend that the bill is some kind of partisan power grab for the Democrats. With sort of unanimity in the Rules Committee, they were able to block, almost all of these amendments. And from here, it passed out of committee at the end of the day yesterday. It is ready for Leader Schumer to put it on the floor. In our coalition, we're advocating to see it hit the floor by July 4th for two reasons, both because we think this is the most massive overhaul of our system since its founding, since 1776, and it is also the 6-month anniversary of the insurrection. So that is something that we're pushing for vocally, but really the sort of drop dead deadline is before August recess, so that is through July. As we all know, the floor is going to present some real challenges. We expect the minority to utilize the filibuster to try to block the passage of the bill. There are, of course, big open questions as to what direction moderate senators are willing to go on reforming the filibuster. We have heard encouraging things from leadership, though. For example, Senator Schumer on the O'Donnell show said, this is something that can't fail. We'll eventually sit down at a table and figure out how to make it happen. Failure is not an option. He's repeated this rhetoric continuously, and it is the same language he used when talking about the American Rescue Plan, the most recently passed COVID relief package, which he got done. So we are focusing in around the country in specific states where there are senators who are unsure about changing the filibuster rules, and really focusing as well on the substance of S1 in those states, because that will be the test. How upset are moderate Democrat senators at the failure of S1's passage when it's blocked by filibuster? How much does it make them want to change the rules? So we are doing a bunch of work, grassroots organizing in places, on those targets, making sure that they understand what's at stake. And we're also encouraging President Biden to be louder, as he'll be needed to make this happen as well, and to apply pressure on those senators. So I'll pause on the For the People Act and just quickly flag that there are a few other places with lots of federal potential and momentum. Rob mentioned the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It is moving, H.R. 4. We expect to pass through the summer and into early fall. D.C. statehood has also moved in the House, and we hope to see similar momentum in the Senate following along in the wake of H.R. 4. In addition, now that we've moved beyond the Trump administration, there's still a lot of work to do to react to what we just experienced, including a ramped up push for reforms to close all the loopholes that were exposed during the last 4 years. These reforms are wide-ranging, as Donald Trump abused every which way, but things like whistleblower protections and reining in pardon powers, to beefing up subpoena power so that Congress can actually get people in to testify, to war powers reforms, to inspectors general reforms, and much more. And many of these needed changes have been collected into a single piece of legislation called the Protecting Our Democracy Act, or POTA, sponsored by Adam Schiff in the House and Amy Klobuchar in the Senate. So we are working hard to pull attention to these reforms as well, and simultaneously to gather some conservative support for components as they progress, which we think is possible. So that is another key focus of Public Citizen. We're doing this work through our Not Above the Law coalition, which is continually focused on accountability and working to make sure that we don't see these kinds of abuses of norms and ethics in the future with any future president. So the last thing I want to mention is just the prospects for additional reform coming out of the executive branch. We've seen some early indications from a really good day one ethics executive order from President Biden and a good voting access executive order that they are committed on the issues of democracy. So we're pushing for additional executive orders, like one on transparency of secret political spending for government contractors, and also pushing agencies to take action where they can. For example, at the Securities and Exchange Commission, there's a long-standing push for rulemaking requiring all public corporations to disclose their political spending. In the wake of this January's attack on the Capitol, lots of corporations seemingly have a deeper understanding of the reputational risks inherent in spending money on candidates. They distance themselves from supporting those who objected to certification of Biden or who encouraged violence. And so this is an opportunity moment for us to seize on the case they're making that political spending is actually an important issue for their company. If they do the wrong thing, it could hurt their bottom line. And so we are pushing hard again for the SEC to require disclosure of secret political spending. There are lots of other avenues we're pursuing within the administration for them to do more, but I'll stop there. I know that's a lot of information, but really it's a lot because there's a lot of momentum. There's a ton happening. People are incredibly committed to democracy reform right now, and Public Citizen is right in the middle of the fight, working as hard as we can to make as much happen as possible.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and super impressive all that you do, and really appreciate it. Let's turn to our members now and supporters who are on the phones who have questions. Again, you want to press *3 if you want to ask a question today, and we'll start with Joyce in New York. Joyce, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. What's your question?
Yeah, well, I think my question has thankfully been answered. That was really, do you think that ending the filibuster is essential in order to be able to reclaim our democracy, and what does Public Citizen plan to do about getting people to end it? But I think you spoke to it.
Thanks, Joyce. I think that's on a lot of people's minds today. Lisa, did you have anything to add about the filibuster? Or Rob?
Sure. Well, Joyce, it's a great question. I mean, I think, the answer is we have to do something. We understand that there are not 10 Republican senators to support any of these democracy bills. And so, if Schumer is sincere in saying failure is not an option, then he is also committed to finding some pathway for either reform or elimination of the filibuster. And so we are, looking ahead to later in the summer to the moment where leadership sort of forces those recalcitrant senators who have not yet committed to rules reform to the table to discuss what options they're willing to live with in order to get this done. Because I think there is clear understanding within the caucus of the necessity for winning on this, both to ensure that our democracy works in the future, and then also something we pay a little less attention to, but they are very cognizant of, which is, what it means for their futures. What will happen in 2022 if we don't enable everyone to vote to, their Democratic majority.
Maybe
Thanks,
I'll say one
Lisa.
other thing, Amanda.
Yeah.
If I just want to jump in, with the context on the issue. So we historically have not taken a position on the filibuster. And we were a little reluctant to come around because, of course, the filibuster has often been used to stop bad things from moving forward. But we just felt we couldn't maintain that position for a few reasons. One is just simple for the functioning of the country. I mean, you've had the Republicans weaponize the filibuster to oppose everything. That's actually what they did under the Obama administration. Right after the Citizens United decision, one of the sort of small pieces that was moving forward to at least somewhat mitigate the damage from Citizens United was a bill to require disclosure of all campaign spending, something that Mitch McConnell had throughout his career said he supported. Well, 59 Democrats voted for it, but it failed in the Senate because of the filibuster, as did pretty much everything else of consequence. And now as we move forward in the Biden administration, it's pretty clear there are not going to be 60 votes for anything consequential. I mean, there may be one or two weird, strange exceptions, but just dealing with the functioning of the country, the Congress has come to a halt. And that just on its own is really not tolerable. And then there were some more specific things. One of course, is the democracy issues. Mitch McConnell has made opposing pro-democracy legislation his single passion as majority or minority leader, and we are in a situation as desperate as I described, and we just thought that we have to get, as Lisa said, we have to get the For the People Act and the other pieces of legislation across the finish line, and the concern about what might happen with other things had to be discounted as against the imperative of rescuing the democracy. And it's similarly true for legislation to address climate change. We just can't wait, and there's no prospect of getting 60 votes for anything that's remotely meaningful on climate. So we just can't let the relic of the filibuster, which does for sure have a horrible history rooted in racism and defense of first Jim Crow and later on opposition to civil rights legislation in the 60s. We can't let that relic stand in our way. So we are now firmly favoring getting rid of the filibuster and forcing Congress to do its job, starting with these democratic reforms.
Thanks so much, Rob. Let's go to Mary now in South Hadley. Mary, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you great.
Okay. I just want to add to my question because of what
Sure.
Mr. Weissman just said. I think Joe Manchin is opposed to ending the filibuster. I believe he might be open to making it a talking-only filibuster. I wonder if there might be middle ground there. The other thing was just to express concern that if it's still possible to tighten up the drafting of the voting rights bill, I think that's very important. I think that when it passes, let's say when it passes, there's going to be a pushback immediately that it's going to face court challenges, and it's got to withstand those with a hostile Supreme Court. So that's my question.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much, Mary.
Well,
you're absolutely right. Go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to take the second part of Mary's question, and then maybe you can take the filibuster part. But so completely agree that we will face legal challenges to this legislation. We are anticipating it and trying to build in our defense to the process. So two things. One is, in the drafting of the bill, they've made every unique section severable. So meaning, if one piece of it is challenged, it will not take the whole bill down with it, which is incredibly important, while something might be bogged down briefly. But secondly, implementation. So, in yesterday's markup, they introduced a manager's amendment, Senator Klobuchar did, which is a bill, basically a substitute for the entire bill with tightened up components and fixing any drafting errors, but also setting clear effective dates for implementation. And one of the sort of places in which there could be challenges to this legislation is, how feasible it is to implement it. And so, they made very clear that there are sort of easy ways for rural districts or smaller districts to move slightly slower or get waivers and then move slower, things that will make it far more feasible to put into place while not undercutting, the transformative nature and what, big districts and cities can do right away, particularly on voting. And so, throughout the manager's amendment, there are lots of little tightenings, which we hope will make it more ironclad and easier to refute when challenged.
Yeah, and I would just add, you're completely right on the question. Anything that's consequential is going to be challenged in court, and we have to recognize the reality of a really hostile and aggressive Supreme Court. So that's just how things are. The For the People Act, as well as the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, were written carefully, so people are really mindful of what the Supreme Court has said. So, for example, the provision on public financing is, faces all kinds of constraints because of Supreme Court prior rulings. So it's not what you'd write if you had, a Supreme Court that had not interpreted the Constitution to be really restrictive in what you can do. For example, the public financing provision, the small dollar matching piece, it's opt-in. It's not forced on candidates. And it would be better if everyone was required to adopt that approach, but it's not possible under the Supreme Court's current jurisprudence. So the bill has been written to deal with that. And that runs through the entirety of the bill. It's all written as best as possible in light of Supreme Court previous decisions to try to be strong and not vulnerable to challenge. But, the challenges are going to happen, so they'll play out. But everybody's been as intentional as possible about avoiding that. And then on the question about the filibuster, you're completely right. There are a lot of different permutations, a lot of different possible solutions of how to work around the filibuster. And from our point of view, any of them are fine. We're much more worried about the end point of not letting the rigid use of the filibuster stand in the way of really important legislation than we are about exactly which Senate rule is adopted to get around that problem. But what you said is also right. That is particularly as relates to some of the Democratic senators who are supportive of the filibuster, foremost among them Senator Manchin from West Virginia. Those kind of workarounds, those technical details may be really important. Senator Manchin said he's not going to support a complete repeal of the filibuster, but there are a lot of possible things, including the talking filibuster, the idea that you can't just say you're going to filibuster, you have to stay on the floor and keep talking, that he may be willing to accept. So that probably is our path forward.
Great, thanks so much. I think Manchin is on a lot of our minds right now, and there's several callers asking questions about that. If you want to ask a question, all you need to do is press *3. We've got thousands of public citizen supporters on the line, and we would love to hear from you. Let's take a call now. Let's see, James in Massachusetts.
Yes, hi.
James, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you? Hi. Yes. I share many of the same concerns. I think there are so many critical issues that need to happen, and they need to happen soon. I'm a member of Citizens Climate Lobby, and we make regular calls to all of our senators and congresspeople. I'm wondering, though, since I'm in a very liberal state and most of my senators are pushing for, things like filibuster reform and H.R. 1 and climate change bills and so forth, but what can we do from states that are fairly progressive with senators and congresspeople who are very progressive to help some of the more reticent Democratic people like Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema? What can we do to help them understand that this really is a crossroads? This really is a point where we are on the edge of a cliff with our democracy, and they really need to join with the other Democrats to allow these things to happen before it's too late.
Thank you so much, James. That's a great question. Lisa, do you want to take a stab at it first?
Sure. Yeah, it is a tricky one because, in particular, when we think about Manchin, one of the things that we know is he is most receptive to hearing from people within his state, from West Virginia, and particular constituencies, from unions and veterans and the like. One other avenue, which we think is going to be important, is senator-to-senator conversation, and then president-to-senator conversation. And so I would say one good way to use your power if you are not in West Virginia is to think about asking your senator to have a conversation with the moderates who are not yet on board. There are, a decent number of progressive senators who, while supportive of rules reform, they haven't necessarily made it a centerpiece of what they're doing. And so they could do more by, having conversations on the floor, by grabbing Manchin or Sinema and talking about why this is important So that's a good ask for your own folks. And then similarly, at some point, this is going to come down to additional pressure from the White House. And so, if you're writing a letter to the editor or, thinking about who else to influence, thinking about the White House, writing, talking to them about, why they should weigh in both publicly, but then also have conversations with the moderates about making this happen and getting it over the finish line, that's also incredibly valuable.
Yeah, there's one other thing that's worth pointing out, which is, yes, if you're calling in from Massachusetts, you have two great senators who are Public Citizen is proud to call friends, and they're great champions on a whole host of issues. But even in Massachusetts or in any other state where you feel like you have senators who are more or less aligned with your views or our views, it still helps to call them. You don't just sort of view it as pressure, but it makes them, first of all, they respond. They have to prioritize things. So when they hear from you, that helps them prioritize. But it also makes them stronger. Like it makes them, because they do keep track, of all the calls and the emails and the letters and stuff. They really do. And it influences what they prioritize. It puts like more bounce in their step if they know that people in their state are urging them to do it. So it's always good to stay in touch, even when that your senators or representatives are aligned and more or less advancing what you'd like to see. It's still really helpful. And then on this particular question, in addition to the points that Lisa was making about the senator-to-senator conversation, the president-to-senator, there's also I think it's going to be an issue for Senator Manchin and for others on this bill, but other bills who are sort of trying to maybe a bit on the fence. What's the national mood? Do people really care? Is there really a moral challenge? So both in terms of like evidencing the seriousness of this and the passion from the grassroots for change, and also the moral necessity of acting right now. For sure, Senator Manchin, to take that example, is going to listen much more to people from West Virginia, but he's also going to take into account, consciously and unconsciously, how much energy there is around the country. So when you do stuff in Massachusetts, or in California, that is not without impact, even in West Virginia.
Agree. Let's go to Carol now, who wants to talk a little bit about the big picture and how this all started with our lovely Citizens United decision. Carol, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
What's your question? What's your question today?
I have read about Citizens United in your publications before, but I can't kind of get a grasp of it. I wanted to send in the petitions and a contribution. But if you could just give me a synopsis of what Citizens United is about.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Rob, you want to take that one?
Sure. So Citizens United was the Supreme Court decision, that's the name of the Supreme Court decision, 11 years ago, that held that corporations have the right to spend as much money as they want to influence elections. And then as it was interpreted, it gave rise to super PACs. If you're seeing all this attention to super PACs and these giant these giant donations from super rich individuals. They're not making them directly to candidates, that's a separate issue, but they're doing all this spending to support candidates or oppose candidates. That all traces back to Citizens United. So it stood for this issue about corporations' right to spend, and it has enabled the explosion of big money from corporations and the super rich in our elections. And with some other decisions, it stands in the way of really comprehensive fixes. So what we've been doing, and that decision was, obviously we think it was wrongly decided, but it was based on the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment. So because it was based in the Constitution, Congress can't undo the decision. The only ways to undo the decision are either for the Supreme Court to reverse itself, which would have been possible under a different scenario where Merrick Garland to become Justice of the Supreme Court, but it does not seem likely any time in the decades we're looking at going forward, or for a constitutional amendment to overturn the decision. So we've been working for that constitutional amendment since literally the day the decision was handed down, And as hard as it is to win an amendment, we've made enormous progress. We have more than 22 states now that have passed resolutions supporting a constitutional amendment. We've got more than 800 cities and towns that have done the same thing. And we have support from a majority of the House and the Senate, which we're going to see going forward in the next weeks and months ahead. Now, that's not enough. We need 2/3 of the Congress and 3/4 of the states. But when we started, we were basically at zero, and everyone thought it was crazy. Now it's been completely mainstreamed, and we are more than halfway to winning this victory.
Thanks so much, Rob. Again, if you want to ask a question today, you can press *3. We've got thousands of supporters across the country joining us today. And right now we'll go to Marcia, who is in Pittsburgh. She wants to know a little bit more about voter registration. Marcia?
Yes, thank you. Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Of course.
Okay, wonderful. So yeah, my question is, how important is same-day registration? I've always, for one thing, as working as a poll worker, to have somebody come in that isn't registered, it does slow down the process, of course, because then you have to go through a lot of steps to make sure that they are, have the right to vote in that district. And I know that there was also a lot of confusion and questioning, and I can't remember whether it was Vermont or New Hampshire, but up there where they have same-day registration as to whether or not people have been bussed in, et cetera. Why is that so critical? Why? I mean, most people, if they're going to vote and want to vote, they have plenty of time, and especially if you have automatic registration, et cetera. I don't know why 2 weeks in advance before an election isn't good enough. If you could just please give me some clarity, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely, and thank you also for volunteering. I know that that's a great deal of work and patience and time. And so, Lisa, what do you have to say about this?
Sure. Well, same-day registration, as you know, allows eligible voters to register to vote and cast their ballot on the same day. And depending on the state, it's kind of a one-stop process for registering and voting on election day or during the early voting period, or both. There are, I believe, 15 states that currently have same-day registration, and the benefits. Eligible voters can also use same-day registration to correct outdated voter registration records and cast a ballot that will be counted in that election. It increases voter turnout. States that allow same-day registration consistently lead the nation in voter participation. I think 4 of the top 5 states for voter turnout, all offer same-day registration. It just really eliminates any arbitrary deadlines that would cut off registration when voters are most interested. And, many citizens become most interested and engaged in the last, few weeks, couple days before election day. So, we're strongly supportive. I think it couples with automatic voter registration. You're not at all wrong to say that will hopefully get many, many more people registered over the course of years. But this will just allow us to have a final catch-all and confirmation and, ability for people to vote if there was any lack of certainty or question whether they would be able to.
Thanks, Lisa. Let's go to George now.
Hello?
George, are you with us in Oregon?
Yes, I am. Here's my question. When we pass for the people, will it take precedent? Will it preempt the voter suppression legislation that's being passed by many of the states? Will it be enforceable? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good question. Rob?
The answer is yes. And there's a kind of a little bit of a division of labor between the For the People Act and the companion piece, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. But yes, it will both establish for every state some of the positive things we were talking about, like automatic voter registration, and then it would prohibit many of the anti-voter measures that are being adopted in states. And then the Voting Rights Advancement Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, would return to the Justice Department both the authority to prevent voter suppression and adopt a requirement for states that have a history of voter suppression of pre-clearing them, getting a pre-approval from the Justice Department before they can adopt anti-voter rules, which they would not receive.
Thanks so much. What happens if we don't pass the For the People Act? I think Shalom has a question about that. Shalom, are you with us in Greenbelt, Maryland? Oh, I think you're there, but my button is frozen. Shalom, can you hear me? Oh, sorry about that. Let's go instead to Sally. Sally has a question that we get all of the time. Sally, are you with us?
Yes. Yes, my question is, I'm a busy person, work full time, I have young adult children living at home due to the pandemic, busy person. I want to maximize my activism time, and I've always heard signing online petitions really is meaningless. I do a lot. I call my elected officials. I write to them. I write letters to the editor. I do a lot of other stuff. But tell me, what do these petitions do for you? Do they help you gauge where voters are, give you a pulse on what's going on? Or what is the purpose of the petitions? Does it really help?
Yeah, thanks so much for that great question, and also for your activism. It really does matter. I'll let Rob take this one.
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. They do definitely help, and they vary a little bit. So, occasionally we do some that are really just a chance for people to express an opinion. You're just outraged about something. You just want to add your name and say, this is just wrong. And that's just kind of got its own expressive value. A lot of the times when we do petitions, they're on particular things that are moving forward, and either on our own or frequently in collaboration with colleague organizations. We stack them all up. Some increasingly now, especially with the pandemic, just metaphorically, like on a disc. But sometimes we actually print them out and deliver them to Congress. And the other thing that they do is when you take action on something like, say, the For the People Act with the petition, you signal to us that that's what you're interested in, and then we follow up with you with things that are specialized, sort of the higher level pieces of action, like exactly the set of things you were describing. A request to email your member with a form that lets you do that, or request to call in, or occasionally recommendations that you send a letter to the editor. So you're doing all that great stuff. But when people sign petitions, it says, hey, yeah, I'm interested, among other things it does, it says, hey, I'm interested in this thing, and we use that as a signal that we should tell you more about what you should do. Occasionally we'll say, this is a really big moment for the For the People Act. We'll just ask everybody to call in. But we know that kind of broad request. It's not the biggest deal in the world to call in, but it can feel like something. And as you say, people are actually busy. So we do try to target that based on people's expressed interest, and that's another function that we get out of the petition signing.
Thanks so much. And for those of you who still have a question, you can press *3. We've got a few more minutes here, and then we're going to wrap up. Let's go now to Zarina. Zarina, what do
Hello?
Do you have a question? Are you with us? Yes, there you are.
Yes, I'm there. Yes, I did have a question regarding the recount in the state of Arizona. And, I'm just concerned because they've already had 3 recounts in Arizona, and now they're having this 4th recount with the cyber ninjas. And I really am concerned because, everyone knows that Biden was elected fair and square, and he's already been inaugurated more than 100 days ago. And has your organization thought about going to court to try to stop these recounts? Because from what I've seen on the Rachel Maddow show, she said that they're going to start doing this. The Republicans, they're starting with Arizona, but they want to do this in a number of other states as well. And I just feel like, where is this going to end? It seems like it's going on forever and ever. So that was my question.
Great question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you know a lot about this. For people who are not so familiar, Arizona, I think you're correct. It's the fourth recount, it's the third or fourth recount that's been insisted upon by I think it's the state Senate, and they've hired a really shady. They're not doing it through the normal processes. They've hired an outside shady contractor with this bizarre name, Cyber Ninjas, to do it. The head of the company is a Trump conspiracist, doesn't deny it. They have no experience in doing vote counting. They appear to be following non-best practices as they're doing it. So they're both. There's reason to be worried that they're biased, and they're showing a lot of evidencing a lot of incompetence. They've got a hard deadline to finish that they're almost for sure not going to meet. They're going to be thrown out of the arena where the recount is going on. So it's all kind of weird through the looking glass stuff, and I'm of two minds about it. So on the one hand, I actually don't think it makes any difference at all, and I think that the state legislators in Arizona have acknowledged that. I think including the head of the Senate. For Biden is in, the count is over, the election is ratified, there's nothing to really review. And of course, even if Arizona were to flip, which it can't because it's already done, Biden still would have been elected. So in one sense, it's just this strange, really, really strange conspiracy theater that shouldn't bother any of us. On the other hand, it's really troubling and connects to the things that I was saying at the beginning of the call. I don't think it'll have any impact whatsoever on the legitimacy of Biden's presidency or the fact that he actually is president. But it is a kind of process for the Trump conspiracists to continue to undermine the credibility of our electoral system and to maintain the narrative and maybe build some people who are believing it as they're sort of fed a constant stream of information on Fox News and elsewhere, that the vote count in 2020 was illegitimate, that Donald Trump should still be president, and all that kind of mix of weird conspiracy thinking. Well, we know where it leads. It led to January 6th. It leads to really dangerous stuff. And if you think the election is being stolen from you and that the government is illegitimate, then of course you're almost justified in doing really extreme, dangerous things. I was around at the rally on January 6th. I wasn't at the Capitol. But I had some sense of the people there. And I think what was really clear is they believed. They believed. So I don't think people in Congress believe this stuff. They're just doing it. But spreading these lies, maintaining these lies, and repeating the lies endlessly really is corrosive, both for the democracy and for our society. It is directly connected with people's refusal to take the most basic measures to mitigate the pandemic. This kind of conspiracy thinking is just dangerous for a coherent and functioning society. So in that regard, I'm really worried about it. I don't think it's the kind of thing that's amenable to legal challenge because I don't think that the thing itself matters, and it's not really a thing of law. It's a thing of culture, and it is troubling. And I think the best thing we can do to combat it is to deepen the democracy and then to do substantive things, which we're pretty pleased the Biden administration is delivering on. But even still, it's going to take a lot of work to undo this really dangerous thinking.
Yeah. And this is Lisa. I'll just add onto that. I mean, I think I completely agree. The fact that this is being conducted by such a partisan, sketchy entity, I think that means that, many people just won't even acknowledge the findings of it. But I completely agree that, this is further tearing at the foundations of our democracy and people's faith in the electoral system. And so, I think one thing that we can do, which we are advocating for, is for this bipartisan commission that will investigate more closely the insurrection on 1/6, which is something that Nancy Pelosi is advocating for, which will give us sort of a central repository to create the pushback narrative in a more official and public way than has thus far been done. So that's something we're working on in addition to the Protecting Our Democracy Act and other pieces which will, hopefully fix our system and deepen democracy and by so doing, increase people's faith in the system.
Absolutely, and that so needs to happen after the last 4 years. Virginia has been waiting on the line for a while, and she's got a question about how she can help. Are you with us, Virginia?
Yes, I am with you. I live in what is currently a fairly deep red state, and calling representatives, they don't even want to bother taking your name. So what is it? What is it you can do? They're not taking, and I know this from calling them. I'm dealing with now Danes and, I've forgotten the guy's name, who is our representative, and they are really right-wing. Matt Rosendale. He's from New Jersey, and he is a developer, and his views are absolutely fixed.
Yeah, I think you're in Montana. So, thank you, Virginia. Lisa, how can you get through?
One quick thing to flag. Jon Tester, one of your senators, is actually incredibly important to some of the dynamics we were discussing earlier. He is seen as a very independent-minded senator, often moderate on issues, although not always, but incredibly supportive of the For the People Act. And so reaching out to him and encouraging him in particular to talk to Manchin, to talk to Sinema, to talk to other senators who are on the fence about filibuster reform, and as a piece of that, our ability to win on democracy issues is hugely important. And so, although I sympathize with the challenges of your state across the board, I think there is one real linchpin place for you to apply pressure that would be incredibly helpful in this moment.
Thanks. And let's hear from Brenda in Florida. Brenda, I know you have a question.
Well, it's somewhat similar to the previous caller. I live in Naples, Florida. My congressman is one of the ones who voted to overturn the election on January 6th, and he's in a heavily gerrymandered district. As well as everyone knows, Rubio and Scott are certainly not amenable to anything that the Biden administration is seeking to do. So other than making the phone calls to the various congressional and senatorial offices and contributing to candidates who support my views, what is there to do?
Absolutely.
We also have a fascist governor, and I'm very fearful that he might get the nomination because I don't think Trump's going to run in 24. And so he's right up there.
Well, I hope you're right about that.
And he's much more dangerous because he's much smarter.
Yeah, I hear you. Rob, what do you think she should do?
I think there's a lot of things to do. And, Brenda, you're describing, you're engaged, right? So you're actually already doing some of the things that a person can do. I think one thing that's important for anyone in your situation is to take a little bit of a bigger picture view and also figure out ways actually to feel part of things that make sure you don't feel alone, so you don't feel too discouraged, right? And that you see the opportunities, even if the people who are your representatives and senators are going to be really challenging and sometimes and often impossible. So, there's some micro stuff that's actually, I think, part of politics. So do you have friends and neighbors that you get together with that you can talk to who have shared values and perspectives? So you guys can just share information with each other and support each other and make sure, just do some reality checks that you're not crazy, but also that you're not alone. Because feeling alone, as the pandemic has taught us, is really disempowering. And if you're disempowered, you're going to drop out, and then you're actually not helping anything. So just finding those little communities, which could be, could be in an apartment building if you live there, or in your neighborhood if you, or it could be, with your family in other states or whatever it is. That's an important thing. There are other ways you can engage, besides with your members, as you do with Public Citizen, for example, and find ways to have influence. And then, even people who appear to be hopeless, there's a couple things to be said about them. One is, even the hopeless people, it's important that they know that there's opposition to things that they're saying that are dangerous and harmful. So it is important to register that with them. If this would maybe be easier in Montana than it is in Florida, given the size of the state. But if you can have any direct contact with the representatives where they see you, not where you're screaming at them, but where you're talking to them when they're sort of forced to confront both common sense and the humanity of people who are disagreeing with them, that's really helpful. And it also makes it so that they can't tell themselves the story that everybody in their districts thinks that they're doing the right thing. That's an important rationalization that people tell themselves, and if we can dispel that, it's really important. And then the other thing is, even people who are pretty bad, as Rubio and Scott are, they can be reached on some things maybe. So I would say that these democracy issues are going to be really tough with both of them, especially Scott. But there are other things where they're positioning themselves, those two both, as supposed populists, where there are ways to push them to challenge them to live up to it. If they're going to say that they're populists and for the little guy, are they willing to confront big pharma on drug pricing? And the answer may be yes. And Rick Scott has been supportive of some reasonably strong measures over the years, actually. So there are some little plays you can make that where you can find ways that maybe you can have a bit more leverage than you would on the things where they're really hostile. But it's a whole set of things, and it sounds like you're doing a lot of them. But I think one thing to really emphasize is to make sure you take steps so you don't feel isolated. It's not you, Brenda. It's everybody. I think all of us. And I just think that is just one of the lessons that has been driven home so clearly by the pandemic. Being alone and disconnected and isolated is bad for people. It is just bad for humans, and and when it comes to politics, it's really disempowering because you just feel that it makes no difference. And if you feel it makes no difference, then what's the point? And you drop out. And if you drop out, we're all worse off. So I will say humbly, as we wind down the call, that I hope you all do feel connected as part of Public Citizen. Those of you who are on our email list or getting our mail and our newsletter, we talk about Public Citizen. We talk about all of us. It's the staff here, for sure, but it's the hundreds of thousands of members and supporters, and that's both the strength of the organization. It's the reason we have leverage when we go up on Capitol Hill, and it's the way that it's just core to what we do to make change. So I hope it also gives each of you, each of us, a sense of connectedness and a feeling that we're engaged in a common project, which we are. If you go back to what I was saying at the beginning, if we're on our own, we're going to lose. We're just going to lose. We're really facing just this incredible dichotomous choice as a country, and if we're on our own, we're going to lose. But if we come together, what we've shown over our 50 years of work, we can make great things happen. And I am really confident that we're, as great as the challenge is right now, that we're poised to do that. If we do the things we're supposed to do together, I'm really confident we're going to win these great democracy pieces of legislation that we need to take our country from the abyss, but not just do that, but to really advance it and deepen the democracy and start to deliver on what the country's supposed to be. Mandy, let me kick it back to you for last words, and just thank everybody for staying with us on the call.
Thanks so much, everyone. We appreciated talking with you today and hoping to connect with you again soon. Have a great day.